Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking about Dungeons & Dragons history, specifically the year 1981, and we are now talking about the 8th year of Dungeons & Dragons history. And we're going to talk about it through the filter of clear, catalysts, locations, entities, artifacts, and relationships. All right, now, what is the catalyst? Who is the catalyst for Dungeons & Dragons in 1981? It is Tom Moldvay, and he is the creator of the artifact for 1981. So Tom Moldvay is the catalyst. The artifact is the red box, the 1981 red box. It is the first Dungeons & Dragons red box. So this is the Moldvay 1981 red box. And so Tom Moldvay is the designer for this box. He's the primary key designer for the 1981 red box. Many, many people to this day will say that the Moldvay red box is the definitive box edition of Dungeons & Dragons, that it is the best ever made, and that the box sets, that this is the pinnacle of Dungeons & Dragons basic box sets. There have been dozens of box sets for Dungeons & Dragons. We're talking about just the rules, the core rules contained in a single box. You hand somebody this box, they have everything they need to play, to have a Dungeon Master and multiple players for Dungeons & Dragons. Within that subset, basic rule boxes, right? The Moldvay 1981 red box is preeminent. It is considered by people who know a great deal about Dungeons & Dragons to be the best of all the boxes that were ever written. They say that it's clearest, but it also gives the most range and most, it demands a lot from the Dungeon Master, but it also brings the game in a format that is both allowing the Game Master to have the Dungeon Master to have a lot of interpretation, and also still giving him a lot of power. But also, the game has more clarity in this version than anything that would ever really come after it. I'm not one of these huge Moldvay absolute. I'm not one of the people who just feels that the Moldvay red box is the end all be all of box sets. I love all the box sets. I'm not sure I have a favorite among them. But the Moldvay is really considered special. And among OSR, Moldvay just has more respect than virtually any other box. So Tom Moldvay comes along, really becomes a standout designer within Dungeons & Dragons with the red box. Also, the red box is iconic. The red box is absolutely iconic among Dungeons & Dragons games. Many people remember the red box. This is coming out of the 80s. By the way, the 1981 Moldvay red box is not the only Dungeons & Dragons red box. We'll talk more about in later years about other red boxes, but it is a really critical, important one. And here we see the continuation of the boxes being really absolutely critical, because while there is the multi-100-page, triumvirate of the PHB, the DMG, and the MM, these continued releases of the basic rule set say, listen, Dungeons & Dragons is not just for wonks. Dungeons & Dragons is not just for highly literate people. It is for muggles too, like people who don't have a PhD, right? People who don't read hundreds of pages for fun. And that's not everybody. A lot of people in our community think everybody reads hundreds of pages. No, that's not the case. Not everybody reads hundreds of pages of anything for fun, let alone rules, right? It's a really distinct thing. And so the boxes have always been incredibly important, and they continue to be important. And so 1981 brings us another critical box and also establishes Tom Moldvay as one of the most significant Dungeons & Dragons designers for the clarity he brings and for the flexibility that the Moldvay red box gives to Dungeon Masters. And, and as a byproduct of that, the excitement that is contained within the game state for the players themselves, right? All right. Where is our location for 1981? All right. That is Cincinnati, Ohio. Now, why are we talking about Cincinnati, Ohio? because that is where the headquarters of Raupartha will be. And Raupartha is a miniatures company, a company that creates miniatures. And Raupartha will make miniatures for all kinds of games, but it's highly arguable that more Raupartha miniatures are sold for Dungeons & Dragons games than every other game combined. And Raupartha will be one of the major companies right out of the gate, an American company that is making miniatures for Dungeons & Dragons. Also, we see now that Dungeons & Dragons is more than creating the tabletop role-playing game industry. It is bolstering entire industries now, like really making them grow robustly. And this is, people don't talk enough about this, where Dungeons & Dragons just didn't impact Dungeons & Dragons itself or just the TRPG industry. It's arguable that Dungeons & Dragons made table manufacturers richer. Like, it sold a lot of products in a lot of different ways, and even in some very auxiliary ways that people would not regularly expect. Okay? Who is our entity for 1981? For 1981, the entity is Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan comes in. He is a big deal president, right? And the reason why is Ronald Reagan is our first major celebrity president, right? He came straight out of Hollywood, and he has a masterful use of the camera. And we're sitting in 2019. I don't need to tell you how important celebrity presidents are. It would become a major thing in America, and it would be a harbinger for how big celebrity would impact American culture from 1981 going forward, affect the country at every level. Celebrity would affect us at the political level, the cultural level, and the societal level, exactly the way Dungeons & Dragons does, right? And Ronald Reagan very much impacted Dungeons & Dragons. And the reason why is the 80s had a massive American wealth boom, right? People started buying into stocks. People's houses started to go up in value. People were buying cars left and right. There's a huge wealth boom in the 1980s that Ronald Reagan brought forward by lower taxes. But companies get excited because they're like, oh my gosh, there's going to be deregulation. There's going to be lower taxes. They start hiring like crazy. Everybody's hired. Everybody's got money, right? The gas problems we had in the 70s disappear. And Ronald Reagan creates a rich, fertile bed of wealth, which, both adults and the children who are the children of those adults will use to buy Dungeons & Dragons products, right? And again, Dungeons & Dragons product is completely a luxury product, right? This is like all the base needs are taken care of. And that's what you're seeing in America. Like, this is one of the first decades where you can't starve in America. There's breadline, there are hundreds. At this point, America is at the point where the vast majority, any major metropolis has, has secular religious charities where people can go and get food if they don't have food. Starvation is virtually unheard of in the U.S. in the 1980s. And there's just a huge boom in wealth. And the whole nation is truly changing based on many, many factors. And Ronald Reagan is a big part of that, right? And it's a major change. It's a major change, and it will shape the entire 1980s decade. And the reality is, most Americans just aren't dealing with base needs. They're dealing with luxuries they want. They're grasping for wants more than needs. And this is a change, right? Because for a long time, in the 20s and 30s, it wasn't like that. America was scrambling for needs. In the 80s, that just ain't the case. At the macro level, few people are scrambling for needs. You are seeing a massive boom of wealth, and Dungeons & Dragons directly is supported by this because it is a luxury product, right? And it's only purchased by literate people generally, and so actually pretty highly literate people, with the exception of the boxes. It's one of the reasons why the boxes are so incredibly important. The artifact, of course, is the 1981 Moldvay red box, which we discussed. What is the relationship, right, to what is the relationship for Dungeons & Dragons in 1981? It is to counterculture and culture, right? In 1981, I purchased a Madrid concave skateboard, right? And I thought that that was quite counterculture. But the reality is, Thrasher magazine t-shirts are sold today as a quite mainstream accessory, right? And the skateboard culture would be the first culture to really establish itself as a counterculture brand while it was completely culture and very much mainstream, right? And so this would be the beginning of counterculture being quite cultural. Things that were considered cultural being very, very mainstream, right? And we see this going all the way to today, right? And Dungeons & Dragons had a distinct relationship to counterculture, right? There were people in the 80s saying this is not that Dungeons & Dragons is not American culture, right? It is countercultural. And we see a growing concern with parents and religious organizations saying Dungeons & Dragons is not a good thing, right? But the reality is, while D&D looked like it was counterculture in the 80s, today it is incredibly cultural and it is considered very, very mainstream. And the reality is there are way bigger fish to fry in 2019 and very, very few parents. You could probably count the parents on, a few different people's hands who have significant concerns about D&D today. And the reason why is children have much, much more deadly concerns than Dungeons & Dragons today. And parents have figured out, wait, you have a hobby where my child needs to do a ton of math and read hundreds of pages of complicated rules to have fun? Maybe I should get my kid on that because I need to get him, because we're really desperately trying to get scholarships. And I think that might help, right? So where in the 80s, D&D goes from counterculture, right? Today, D&D is pure culture, right? It's not counterculture at all. And it's quite mainstream. It's known to the mainstream. It's still a niche product, but it's very much known to the mainstream. I think one of the biggest vectors for D&D today is Dungeons & Dragons is really known as a key ingredient for the creation of the whole video game industry. And so that's really important. So the relationship is counterculture, and I'm just reminded of that old Madrid concave skateboard I owned back in 1981. That is a J. Scott Garibay clear history of Dungeons & Dragons in its 8th year of history, specifically 1981. Please let me know what you think of Dungeons & Dragons history in 1981 below in the comments. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.